This is For the Governed, a podcast series brought to you by Athlons. Here are your hosts, Tim Markison and Ron Cates.
Welcome to another edition of the Athlons podcast. I'm Ron Cates. With me is Tim Markison, the CEO and founder of Athlons. This is a particularly thought-provoking segment. We've talked about how adamant we are about preventing child abuse, but this is a little bit different tact on that. Stop abusing kids. What's that mean, Tim?
Well, let me put a little background context in this. So when I started dealing with my issues a little over 30 years ago from being sexually assaulted as a child, the data suggested that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys would be sexually assaulted in their childhood. Here we are 30 years later, and the data is essentially the same. Now, it's far from an exhaustive search. You can't interview every person and ask them if they were sexually assaulted. It's just not feasible. And then, the other issue with that.
So it could be even higher than that.
Yeah.
It's definitely not smaller.
Most likely not. And then, the other issue with that is, some people aren't going to answer correctly. And some may be intentional, hiding the truth, and others may be just don't remember. Like for me, if you'd have asked me when I was a child, was I being sexually abused or hurt in any way, I'd have said no. I was too afraid to admit what was happening to me. My perpetrators made it very clear to me that my life would be in danger if I spoke out. So that fear would have prevented me from ever telling the truth of what was happening to me. And in my early adulthood, I don't remember my childhood, and I still don't remember much of my childhood. So if you'd have asked me when I was in my early 20s, was I abused as a kid, I'd have said no, because I don't remember. And even after it started to become clear with the memories that were coming back and the treatment and the help that I was getting, that it was clear that I was sexually abused, and I probably would have answered still no. Excuse me. For several reasons. One is just the shame of admitting that I was a victim of sexual assault. It's kind of one of those taboo subjects that
we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's too icky and too painful to even consider that it happens, but of course it does.
Yeah. And then the second and probably bigger factor is I'm still afraid. I'm still afraid of telling the truth, of admitting what happened because of how much fear was instilled in me as a child.
And I think it's viewed as a weakness, so instead you have this stoic, suck it up attitude, right?
Right. And I think, especially for men, we're taught not to be emotional and just really suck it up and just move on and put the past in the past. And with the damage to the psyche and the soul that abuse does, and it doesn't have to be sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, it all causes damage that makes us feel less than worthy.
So this is incredibly difficult to talk about at any age, and that's one of the reasons we don't hear about it as much. Now you've decided, you've taken a strong stance where you're going to come out and talk about it. How did that evolution happen? And what have the ramifications of that been?
It was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided that I was going to speak out of what happened to me. And it was preceded by a series of flashbacks. It was very bizarre, but for 6 nights in a row, at 2 a.m. exactly, I woke up in the middle of being assaulted. And the pain on my chest, the pain in my body, not being able to breathe. Every night for 6 nights that happened. And on the 6th, and each night I kept hoping it was going away until the 6th night, I decided, I'm going to get up and I'm just going to feel my feelings and write about it. And as I was processing that, it hit me that I need to speak out, because here I am, at the time in my mid 50s, and I'm still afraid. And that's exactly what perpetrators want. They want their victims to stay silent. They want their victims to live in fear. And I wasn't going to let them win. I couldn't do anything about it as a kid, but I can do something about it now.
Right. So you've taken a lot of power back by
Yep.
being willing to speak about it. So I know it's been positive for you. How has it been? What do you think the impact has been on others?
It's been an interesting journey. So, because I have been much more open about it. The one thing I'll notice for me, and then I'll answer your question, is the more I talk about it, the easier it is to talk about. And I could be sharing the same story, and those be different parts that hit me emotionally, and I'll get emotional. And I've gotten to the point where, I'm not apologizing for that. That's part of the healing process. Mm-hmm. But what's been interesting is when I have shared with people, they'll share back. And, for a lot of people that I've talked to, they'll say, I can't believe I'm telling you this. I haven't told anybody this before. And yet they'll open up because of my opening up about what happened. And, and then they can relate to the damage that is done and carried into their adulthood. And as they work through those challenges of feeling inadequate and that pain and self-loathing, it's the more I found that I can express what's happening and express those feelings, the more they dissipate.
So you, me, our company, Athlon's, obviously very devoted to preventing child abuse, and we've offered a lot of financial support to organizations that help kids that have been abused.
Right.
Now, you have a new tactic to add on to that.
Right.
That I think has been overlooked by almost everyone else. And that's, how do you give some kind of help to the abuser so they don't abuse anymore?
Right. So from what I've learned through a variety of research and books and talking to people is that almost all abusers were victims themselves at one time in their life. And part of how they deal with their issues of feeling inadequate and self-loathing is they perpetrate what was done to them on others. And it's usually their kids or other kids. So we have to stop that cycle. No amount of legislation, no amount of talking about preventing child abuse, to me, that's too soft of a term. It's like, no, we need to talk directly to the abusers, and you need to stop. And, but I think, I want to believe that most abusers, at least at their core, are good people. They just do some really bad things because they're hurt. And if they can get the help that they need to soothe their wounds, then they'll stop abusing. And if we can get them to start healing, then the cycle of abuse is going to go down. So that's a lot of what we're going to be promoting as Athlons, and me personally is stop abusing. If you're abusing, stop abusing. Get help for yourself. Learn how to deal with those issues in a better way than hurting others. And to those people that are perpetrating, remember how bad that felt. How you felt having that done to you. And now you're doing it to somebody else's child or your child. Stop. Get help. And there are so many resources out there. One of the things that, in addition to counseling I did 3 stints of inpatient dealing with the trauma that happened to me. But the other thing I did is I did 12-step programs. I did Al-Anon.
There's a lot of great ones.
Yeah. So, and you can easily find a 12-step program just by Googling it. They have all kinds. They have for addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, food, any of those things. So I use 12-step programs. I went to Al-Anon because of the abusive environment I grew up in. And I also I did 12-step eating disorder program. My addiction was to food, and I'm fortunate in a way that it wasn't drugs and alcohol because of how addictive, my personality can be. But for me, this is, I guess in a way I have to thank my perpetrators because they used drugs and alcohol as a way to subdue me when they were abusing me. So that feeling of being drunk, or when a sedative starts to kick in and you get that little bit of tingly, buzzy feeling, that freaks me out. So the first couple of sips of alcohol I had and start to get a little lightheaded, it's like, no way. So that's...
So in a backwards way,
yeah.
They ended up being a positive influence by being the worst possible examples you can imagine.
Yeah. I don't know how else to describe it, but just it's fate. It's God. It's a higher power that has led my life. And like you just said, here's the fact that I was abused in such a way that prevented me from being a drug addict or an alcoholic. Because I'm sure I would have been. Because what else would there have been to subdue those horrible, horrible feelings I had towards myself?
So Tim, I want to close. For people who want to, wonder how they even get started to get help, there is one excellent resource.
Right.
It's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They have a national toll-free helpline, 24/7, 365 days a year. The number is 1-800-662-HELP, HELP, which is 4357. You can also visit their website at samhsa.gov, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.